She was just a tired passenger, sleeping quietly in seat 7C. She had no idea the plane's autopilot had silently failed high above the mountains. Both pilots were unconscious. The plane was falling fast towards solid rock. Then, two military Black Hawks radioed the cabin with one urgent order: "Wake her up, now." Before you watch full story, comment below from which country are you watching. Don't forget to subscribe for more amazing stories. Trans-West Flight 219 left Denver at 11 at night, heading for Seattle. It was a quiet red-eye flight. Most of the 140 passengers were asleep before the plane even reached its cruising height of 35,000 feet. In seat 7C, near the window, sat a woman named Captain Emily Sanders. She wore plain jeans, a gray jacket, and simple black shoes. Nobody on the plane knew that she was an active Air Force pilot who flew the F-35 fighter jet. She had just finished 6 months of hard duty overseas, and all she wanted now was to sleep and go home. She put on her headphones, leaned her head against the window, and fell into a deep sleep before the plane even left the ground. Up in the cockpit, Captain Robert Hale and First Officer Daniel Cruz were flying the plane. Both men were calm and experienced. The autopilot was doing most of the work, keeping the plane on a steady path through the dark sky above the mountains near the Idaho and Washington border. It was 1 in the morning, and the cabin behind them was silent. Everyone was sleeping. Then, without warning, a small part at the back of the plane began to fail. It was called the outflow valve, a piece of metal that controls the air pressure inside the plane. A worn part inside it got stuck, and slowly, the valve opened wider than it should. Air began leaking out of the plane into the freezing sky outside. This was not a sudden crash of pressure that would shock everyone awake. It was slow and quiet, the kind of failure that is more dangerous because nobody notices it happening. Inside the cockpit, a warning light turned on. A soft alarm sound rang out. Captain Hale looked at the light, but his mind felt slow and foggy. This is what happens when a person does not get enough oxygen. The brain becomes confused, calm, and sleepy, even though the body is in danger. He did not feel afraid. He felt tired, the way a person feels right before falling asleep. "There's a light," he said slowly to First Officer Cruz. His words came out soft and unclear. Cruz looked at the same light but could not understand what it meant. "It's probably nothing," he mumbled. "Just a small problem." He reached toward a switch but his hand missed it and dropped to his lap. He gave a tired laugh, the kind of laugh that made no sense in that moment. While both men were still slowly losing their strength, another problem was growing without anyone noticing. Outside the plane, the air was extremely cold, far below freezing, and small amounts of ice had begun forming on tiny tubes attached to the outside of the aircraft. These tubes, called pitot tubes, were very important. Their job was to measure the plane's speed and send that information to the autopilot computer. Normally, small heaters inside these tubes would melt any ice before it could cause a problem. But because Captain Hale and First Officer Cruz were both losing their ability to think clearly from lack of oxygen, neither of them had turned on the heater switch for these tubes at the start of the flight, something that would normally be done without a second thought. As the ice slowly built up inside the tubes, the readings sent to the autopilot became wrong and confused. The computer began receiving speed numbers that changed suddenly and did not match reality. A modern autopilot system is built to protect itself when this happens. It does not guess or take risks. Instead, when it receives information it cannot trust, it simply gives up control rather than risk flying the plane in the wrong direction based on false numbers. A calm automated message appeared on the cockpit screen, one that neither pilot was awake to see. Autopilot disconnected. There was no loud alarm attached to this specific message, because normally a pilot would notice right away and take over the controls by hand. But there was nobody awake to notice. The control column, no longer held level by the computer, slowly tipped forward under its own weight and under the weight of Cruz's unconscious body leaning on it. Without a system flying the plane and without a human hand correcting it, the nose of the aircraft began to point downward, and the plane started its slow, silent fall out of the sky. This was the true beginning of the emergency, a plane with a failed autopilot, 2 unconscious pilots, and no one left to notice that anything was wrong. Within a short time, both men lost consciousness. Cruz's head fell forward onto the controls. Hale leaned back in his seat, his eyes closing as if he were only taking a short nap. Neither of them ever put on the oxygen mask that hung beside their seats. The cockpit became silent except for the quiet hum of the plane's computer systems. The airplane, carrying more than 100 sleeping people, was now flying itself with nobody watching. On the ground, a flight controller named James Cole was sitting in the control tower for Seattle. He was watching many small dots of light on his radar screen, each one showing a different plane in the sky. He tried to speak to Flight 219 through the radio. "Trans-West 219, please respond," he said. There was no answer. He looked closer at the screen and saw something wrong. The number showing the plane's height was slowly going down, even though nobody had reported any problem. The plane should have stayed at the same height, but instead it was falling, little by little, minute by minute. "Trans-West 219, if you can hear this, please respond," Cole said again, his voice now sharp with worry. Still nothing. He quickly pressed a button that connected him to emergency services. "I have a passenger plane that is not answering the radio," he said. "It is losing height without any reason. I believe the pilots may be unconscious from lack of oxygen. We need help right away." At that moment, not far from where the plane was flying, 2 military helicopters called Black Hawks were flying low through the mountains. They were returning from a training mission in bad weather, moving carefully through a heavy snowstorm near the peaks. The pilots wore night vision goggles that turned the dark world into a strange green picture. Their call signs were Falcon 1 and Falcon 2. Suddenly, the radio inside Falcon 1 came alive with an urgent message from the military command center. "Falcon 1, this is command. We have an emergency. A commercial plane, Trans-West 219, has lost contact and is falling out of the sky. Fighter jets are being sent, but they are still far away. The plane is going to hit the mountains in less than 15 minutes if nothing changes." The pilot of Falcon 1, a man named Chief Warrant Officer Mark Dorsey, felt his stomach tighten. "Command, we are only helicopters. We cannot stop a falling airplane." "We know," the voice answered. "We don't need you to stop it. We need you to find it and help guide it. Also, listen carefully. We checked the passenger list on that plane. There is an Air Force pilot on board. Her name is Captain Emily Sanders. She flies fighter jets. She is sitting in seat 7C. If she can wake up and reach the cockpit, she might be able to save the plane." "How do we wake her up from a helicopter?" Dorsey asked. "We are connecting your radio to the plane's cabin phone system right now," command said. "If you can find the plane and get close enough, you may be able to talk directly to someone inside." Through the snow and darkness, the 2 helicopters searched the sky. Then, high above them, Dorsey's co-pilot pointed toward something huge and silent moving through the clouds. It was the passenger plane, dropping slowly, its lights dim, heading straight toward the side of a mountain covered in snow and trees. "I see it," Dorsey shouted over the sound of the helicopter blades. "Command, connect me to that plane right now." Inside the passenger cabin, most people were still deeply asleep, their bodies weak from the thin air. Near the front of the plane, a flight attendant named Laura Bennett was leaning against a food cart, her head pounding with pain. This headache was one of the first signs that her body was slowly waking up as the plane dropped lower and the air became easier to breathe. Suddenly, a loud ringing sound broke the silence. It was the emergency phone on the cabin wall, the line used only for serious problems. Laura opened her eyes slowly, feeling sick and dizzy. The phone kept ringing. She reached up with a shaking hand and picked it up. "Hello?" she said weakly. A strong, clear voice spoke through the phone. Listen to me carefully. This is Chief Dorsey with the military. Your plane is falling. Both pilots are unconscious. You will crash into the mountains in less than 9 minutes. Laura's eyes opened wide with shock. The fear in her body pushed away the sleepiness at once. She looked out the small window on the door and saw dark mountains covered in snow, closer than she had ever seen from an airplane before. Oh no, she said. The masks never came down. Everyone was sleeping. Do not panic, Dorsey said firmly. There is a military pilot on your plane. Her name is Sanders. She is sitting in seat 7C. Go wake her up right now. This is the only way anyone survives. Laura dropped the phone and ran into the dark cabin, holding on to the seats to keep her balance as the plane shook. 7C, she whispered to herself. 7C. She found the row and saw a woman with a gray jacket and headphones, sleeping with her arms crossed. Laura grabbed her shoulders and shook her hard. Wake up. Please, wake up. We need your help. Emily Sanders opened her eyes at once. Years of military training had taught her body to wake up fast, ready for anything. She felt the strange angle of the plane immediately. The nose was pointed down. The engines sounded quiet. Something was very wrong. What is happening? She asked, pulling off her headphones. The pilots are unconscious, Laura said, her voice shaking. The plane is falling. The military called. They said you're a pilot. Please, you have to help us. Emily did not waste a second asking more questions. She unbuckled her seatbelt and moved quickly to the front of the plane, grabbing the phone that was still hanging from its cord. This is Captain Sanders, United States Air Force, she said into the phone. Who is this? Chief Dorsey, Army helicopter pilot, the voice answered. Captain, your plane is at 10,000 feet and falling fast. You have about 6 minutes before you hit the mountains. You need to get into that cockpit and take control. Emily looked at the strong cockpit door in front of her. After important safety rules were made years ago, all cockpit doors on passenger planes were built to be very strong and hard to break. It was locked from the inside. The door is locked, she said. Both pilots are unconscious inside. Tell me how to get in. There should be a keypad, Dorsey said. A code that lets you in during emergencies. Emily turned to Laura. Is there a code for this door? Tell me now. Laura's mind was still cloudy from the lack of oxygen, but she forced herself to remember her training. 3790, she said slowly, pointing to a small panel with numbered buttons beside the door. Emily typed the numbers quickly. A small light above the panel changed from red to a blinking yellow color, and a soft alarm began to sound. She pulled hard on the door handle, but it did not open. Why isn't it opening? She shouted. There's a delay, Laura said. After the code is entered, the pilots have 60 seconds to say no if it's dangerous. If they don't answer because they can't, the door will open by itself after 1 minute. We don't have a full minute, Emily said, watching through the small window on the door as the mountains grew closer and closer. Snow-covered trees were now clearly visible, lit by the pale light of the moon. Behind her, the sudden shaking of the plane in rough mountain air was waking up more passengers. People began to realize something was terribly wrong. Some screamed. A man near the front gripped his seat tightly, breathing fast with fear. Oxygen masks that had finally dropped down were swinging loosely from the ceiling, unused. Emily pressed her ear against the door and listened. Even through the strong material, she could hear a mechanical voice from inside the cockpit repeating the same warning again and again. Pull up. Pull up. Terrain. She counted the seconds in her head. 15. 14. 13. The plane's nose dropped lower as nobody controlled it from inside. The wind outside grew louder, screaming past the metal body of the plane. Come on, Emily whispered, staring at the light. Open. 3, 2, 1. With a loud click, the door unlocked. The light turned green. Emily pulled the heavy door open with all her strength. Inside the cockpit, red warning lights flashed everywhere, and loud alarms filled the small space. First Officer Cruz was slumped forward over the controls, his body pushing the steering column down, making the plane dive even faster. Captain Hale sat leaning back, unaware of anything happening around him. Laura, get in here and pull him back, Emily ordered, pointing at Cruz. Laura rushed in and grabbed Cruz by the shoulders, pulling him back into his seat with all the strength fear could give her. This freed the controls on his side. Emily grabbed Captain Hale by his uniform and pulled him out of the pilot's seat, letting him fall gently to the floor near the back wall. There was no time to be gentle. She slid into the empty seat and placed both hands on the steering column, feeling the familiar shape beneath her fingers, though this was a much bigger plane than the fighter jets she was used to flying. She looked at the screen in front of her. Speed, 450 knots. Height, 3,200 feet. The plane was still falling fast. Outside the front window, a wall of snow and rock filled the entire view. They were heading straight into the side of the mountain. Pull up. Pull up, the automated voice kept warning. Emily pressed the button to turn off the autopilot completely. She grabbed both throttles, the controls that give the engines power, and pushed them all the way forward, asking the engines for full power. Jet engines take a few seconds to build up their strength, and those seconds felt like forever. She pulled back on the controls with both hands, using all her strength. The plane was heavy and slow to respond, fighting against her at first. Slowly, the nose of the plane began to lift. The sudden change pushed everyone in their seats hard. The structure of the plane made loud groaning sounds under the pressure. A warning shook the controls in her hands, telling her the wings were close to losing their lift completely. If she pulled too hard, the plane could stall and fall out of the sky. If she did not pull hard enough, they would hit the mountain. She had only a small safe space between the two dangers, and she had to find it. The number showing their height above the ground dropped fast. 1,000 feet. 500. 400. Trees flew past the windows so close that individual snow-covered branches could be seen clearly. The bottom of the plane scraped through the very top of the tallest trees, sending a shake through the entire body of the aircraft. Then, suddenly, the view outside changed. The wall of rock and trees disappeared, replaced by open black sky. They had cleared the mountain ridge with less than 100 feet to spare. High above, Chief Dorsey watched from his helicopter in complete silence, expecting to see an explosion. Instead, he watched the huge shape of the plane lift back into the sky, climbing steadily away from the mountains. "Command, this is Falcon 1, he said, his voice shaking with relief. The plane pulled up. "I repeat, the airliner is climbing." She did it. Inside the cockpit, the alarms finally stopped as the plane reached a safe height. Emily let out a long breath, her hands still tightly gripping the controls. Her heart was beating fast, but her mind stayed calm and focused, just as it had through the entire emergency. She reached for the pilot's headset hanging nearby and put it on, then pressed the button to speak with the ground. "Seattle Center, this is Trans-West 219, she said, her voice steady despite everything she had just been through. "Both pilots are unconscious. I am an off-duty military pilot, and I currently have control of the aircraft. We have cleared the mountains and are climbing to a safe height. I need immediate help and a runway for landing." There was a short pause before the controller answered, his voice full of surprise and relief. "Trans-West 219, we hear you clearly, Captain. Turn right and follow heading 030. We're bringing you home." The plane leveled off safely, and within the next hour, with emergency crews waiting on the ground, Flight 219 landed safely in Seattle. Every single passenger survived. Captain Hale and First Officer Cruz woke up in the hospital soon after, confused but alive, thanks to a woman in seat 7C who had only wanted a quiet flight home.